A major step on the road to democracy, or will Ethiopia's first general election under Abiy Ahmed be remembered as another marker of the tension that's left nearly 1 in 5 citizens from being able to cast a ballot this Monday? We'll ask why conflict has spiraled under a leader rewarded just 2 years ago with a Nobel Peace Prize. There's Tigray in the throes of a full-scale civil war, but also Abiy's home region of Oromia, where calls for self-determination have fueled another insurgency and a crackdown. Supporters of Abiy argue it's 2 steps forward, 1 step backwards in an Ethiopia where liberal democracy needs time to take hold after a long legacy of strongman rule. Even though the current government's jailed dissidents and enlisted the help of Eritrea to crush the rebellion in Tigray, does it still have what it takes to heal and unite this Horn of Africa powerhouse? Today in the France 24 debate, we're wondering which way for Ethiopia. Joining us, Ethiopia's ambassador to France, Henok Teferishol. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Gérard Prunier, the author of Understanding Contemporary Ethiopia, Monarchy, Revolution, and the Legacy of Meles Zenawi. Welcome back. Good to see you.
Thank you.
From Addis Ababa, William Davison, senior analyst at think tank Crisis Group. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much, although I'm currently in the United States.
Oh, where are you?
I'm in Fort Myers, Florida.
Fort Myers, Florida. Okay, great. Thanks for being with us, William. And
a long way from Addis.
A long way from Addis, indeed. And from London, Awal Allo. You are definitely in London, Awal, right?
Yes, I am. Yes.
Okay, senior lecturer in international law at Kiel University. Welcome to the show, the France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, #F24debate. The polls were due to have closed, although our correspondent says they were extended due to the long lines. It'll be several days before final results for the House of People's Representatives are known, the first major electoral test since Abiy Ahmed came to power and formed the ruling Prosperity Party. The civil war in Tigray, ethnic tensions elsewhere, the subtext as citizens in the capital came out to go to those polling stations.
የሰላም ጊዜ ይሆናል ብለን እናስባለን። አሁን ከዚህ በኋላ ምርጫ ካለ መንግስት አለ። እስካሁን መንግስት የለም እየተባለ ነው አይደል? ስለዚህ ከዚህ በኋላ ደግሞ ያለውን እንደ እግዚአብሔር ፍቃድ ለአንድ ሀገር መንግስት ያስፈልጋል። በድምጻችን ከእግዚአብሔር ጋር እንግዲህ ሰላም እንሆናለን ብለን እናስባለን።
ለሀገራችን ሰላም እንዲሆን ዋናው ትልቁ ነገር ሰላም ነው። ሰላም እንዲሆንልን እመኛለሁ። ሰላም ይሆናል ደግሞ ተስፋ አደርጋለሁ።
እንግዲህ እስካሁን ድረስ ያለውን ነገር እንደምታውን ነው። እንደሚረጋጋ ነገር ይምረጡልን ብለን ነው። ሀገር እንዲረጋጋ ነው። በቃ
Henok Teferishol, your reaction to those concerns of voters there coming out to cast their ballots?
I think the voters have spoken very clearly with the long queues that we have seen. We were told there will be apathy by some, and we see long queues with voting hours extended from 6 to 9 p.m. We were told there will be chaos. We have very disciplined, organized people exercising for their first time their right to choose genuinely, their right to choose their own government. So this is a major step forward for Ethiopia. And we believe that on this basis, Ethiopia can go forward strongly and together. For the last 30 plus years, we've seen the seeds of division being sown across our country. Those seeds of divisions have to be healed. And it is together that we can heal them. And it is also together that we can bring this country to a higher level.
So we've had elections in the past where the opposition's won seats, most notably 2005 comes to mind. What makes this vote different, though?
I think what makes this different is that those institutions that are monitoring the vote, organizing the vote, are truly independent. And I think the National Electoral Commission has proven itself to be a truly independent body, not because it is headed by a former opposition leader only, but it acts and in the decisions it has taken. The courts have also shown their truly independent nature with decisions that go against the government that they've taken. So all in all, the environment in which we are in is truly one, the vote will reflect the will of the people.
Gérard Prunier, you agree this is a different election from those in the past?
Yes and no. Because I think what the electorate mostly says, you know, the three person who spoke, peace. That's what we want, first of all. And right now, unfortunately, I'm not sure that the election will bring more peace. I mean, peace is not something like a cheese you can cut in various parts. But in fact, the country...
But is the process itself different from before? Is this election different?
Well, it has to do with the independence of the National Electoral Commission. I will not make any guesses about that. But right now, why do people go to vote? I think what they want is in the hope. The word democracy doesn't mean very much in Ethiopia for obvious reasons. There was never any. So how can people gauge something they've never known? So they hope. We go, we vote. This is what the Farange want us to do. Somehow something will come out. It's a kind of jumping into the unknown and hoping that the best turns out. But, it's clear that they're not voting for one party or another party. They're voting for peace. And will they get it?
Alo, what do you make of the long lines we've seen in the capital?
I think, first of all, the capital does not really reflect the situation in the country. The capital city and one particular region, the Amhara regional state, is known to have aligned with the ruling party and some opposition political parties that are also aligned with the ruling party who are running in this election. So Addis cannot be a proper barometer for what is going on in the country. But broadly speaking, I think the idea that this election somewhat mark a significant departure from the previous election is laughable, to be honest. What the government actually has been saying over the course of the last 5-6 months is not that these elections will be free, fair, and credible, but that they will be better than the previous elections. And these previous elections are elections where the ruling party won 100% of seats in 2015 and some 99.6% in 2010. And interestingly, some of the people who now claim that those institutions in the party were undemocratic and divisive, they were part of that system themselves. And it's amusing that we now have people who are criticizing the past while the current practices are exactly the same. But at the same time, we are going to do this election at a time when the divisions in the country are so deep, there's simply no basic consensus on the future direction of the country, and also broader, I think, worries in terms of events in Tigray.
All right, let's hear one voice from the opposition, Awal. Some in the opposition are boycotting, others are taking part. And with the elections pushed back to September, and what is it, more than 100 of Ethiopia's 547 constituencies, the Ethiopian Citizens for Social Justice of Birhanu Nega made the choice to take part. There he is voting.
Rather than having it in one day, it is much more important to make sure that the election can be credible. In places where there have been some security problems or election-related problems, including some places where the ballots were opened, they should not take place, and they should move it. And I think it would give the election board another 2-3 months to prepare better and have elections there. That is credible.
Okay, so better late than never, he says. Awal Alo, there's an opposition leader taking part in the election.
Absolutely. There are some opposition parties that are taking part in the election. And I think I made the point that these are opposition parties that are ideologically aligned with the ruling party and the prime minister. And I think one of the central problems in Ethiopia, one of the reasons why some of the parties have boycotted the election, or some of the factors that led to them withdrawing from the political space, is the fact that the prime minister offered a vision of the future that is in radical contrast to what their people want, and he's determined to impose that vision on pretty much everyone. And in pursuit of that vision of the future, he has eliminated some of the most formidable opponents from the political space, including from, for example, the Oromia regional state, where he himself comes from, and about a third of the MPs come from. The Tigray war regardless of how it is presented, in the final analysis, it's a military confrontation that resulted from the inability of the two actors to settle political ideological differences in its future. So you do have these political parties who are participating, but for them, what really matters is whether their vision of the future has a better chance rather than whether the entire country gets a democratic vote.
William Davison, for you, what's the significance of this election day in Ethiopia?
I think we have to look at this election in terms of what has come in advance of it, and then what's actually occurring today. And what I mean by that is that one of the significant elements here is that a number of opposition actors have found themselves excluded. Those opposition parties in Oromia, they complain they suffered repression by the government, the arrest of leaders and activists that made competing impossible. Therefore, they are sitting out the election. And in their place, we see something of an increase in an armed insurgency in Oromia, which has led to these the vote not taking place as scheduled. So we have these elements of the political situation where opposition actors have been excluded. We see an increase in armed opposition activity and confrontation with the government. And that has to be seen as an important characteristic of this election. And I think the question there is, this election is very unlikely to do anything to resolve the political divisions that are driving the violence, whether in Tigray or Oromia elsewhere. But there is a possibility the election could exacerbate the violence. So we have to see what comes of that. Of course, the other element is that, as Awal says, there are a number of opposition parties who are still competing. Many of them have the character of being against ethno-nationalist politics, generally maybe against Ethiopia's ethnic federal system. Now, they are competing in the election, and we see some areas, some locations, such as Addis Ababa, the capital itself, where we will see a competitive election. And there we will be able to gauge the level of support for the Prime Minister's ruling party against competing opposition parties. So really, there are two sides to this election. One side with what happens with those actors who have been excluded from the process, and then we have a sort of remaining competitive process, which will also be important, as I said.
William, can you just explain for our viewers, because when Abiy Ahmed burst onto the scene in 2018 internationally, first ever leader of Ethiopia to hail from Oromia, we thought, it's going to be a native son who's there. So why are there problems still in that region?
When we talk about the excluded actors and ethno-nationalism and these divisions, we have to refer back to the protests that brought Abiy to power, which were primarily centered in Oromia. Now, some of those demands were of an ethno-nationalist character from the protest movement. They wanted to see genuine autonomy for Oromia region within the federation. They wanted a fair share, as they saw it, of power at the federal level for Oromia and the Oromo people. Other more specific demands relating to language and the contested capital, Addis Ababa. These were the promises or the demands of the protest movement. Now, when the Prime Minister took power, he undoubtedly had a difficult job at balancing all of the competing interests in Ethiopia. What we have seen as the transition unfolded since 2018 is a failure to peacefully manage all of those demands and the lapse into violent politics, whether in Tigray, Oromia, or elsewhere. The fact of the matter is those demands of the protest movement have not been met by Abiy. And increasingly, he is seen to take a more Ethiopian nationalist position, one which is more friendly towards Amhara positions, a sort of historic rival community of the Oromo in terms of the Ethiopian political state. So it's that failure, as the Oromo protesters see it, for their demands to be met, the demands of their protest movement, that has led to this loss of support for the Prime Minister in his home region, the boycott of the opposition parties, and an increase in armed insurgency in Oromia.
Ambassador Tefera, it is a juggling act. It is a balancing act. What do you do when you're Prime Minister of Ethiopia and you have this federal state and where, well, let's be blunt about it, your ethnic origin does matter?
Well, a couple of things about what was said which were factually not correct. One assertion was that the long queues were seen only in Addis Ababa. That is false. The long queues were seen throughout Ethiopia, The pictures are there even on social media. Attested also by AU observers, so it's not disputed. We can agree on opinion, but we could disagree on opinion, but facts are facts. In Oromia, in Addis Ababa, in the southern region, in Amhara region, in Benchangul, in Gambella, in many regions of Ethiopia, we've seen long lines and long queues of people expressing their will to vote. Secondly, people yearn for democracy. I don't agree with the assertion that was made that somehow because we're Africans and we are not used to democracy, we don't want to choose our leaders. That is not correct. Yes, we don't have a history of democracy, but today's generation and people of Ethiopia today want to choose their leaders to be able to say, this is the platform I support. And in particular, the number one platform, as expressed by the lady voter that we saw, is peace and unity. We want peace and security. These are the elements of the people that express themselves. Yes, you have activists such as Mr. Awal who shout and who say things abroad, mainly not as academic, but as activists and who distort the reality. But the fact is that in Ethiopia, people are very comfortable with their ethnic identity and their Ethiopian identity. It is the activists that are not comfortable. So in Ethiopia, you don't have civil strife. You don't have communities fighting each other. What you have is activists instigating political actors as well who try to have fights or disagreements between people, between communities. But that has not taken hold. And the country is together because our unity is based on concrete things. We share the same blood. We share the same culture. We share the same religion. We share the same social fabric. Therefore, over the last 3 years, and I would say even over the last 3 decades, what we've seen is trying to oppose people on the basis of identity. And what the Prime Minister and the party in power is trying to say, no, you can actually accommodate the two and live together in peace. The people of Ethiopia accept it, and you see it today in the amount of people coming out to vote throughout the country, long queues, very disciplined. You saw in social media, abroad, people calling for boycott, people saying it will be chaos. Today will be a day where the whole country will be torn apart. Nothing of that sort has happened. And nothing of that sort will happen because Ethiopians truly and dearly hold on to their country.
I want to pick up on that point. Unfortunately, we have to take a very quick break. We'll be right back. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate, and we are looking at Ethiopia's first elections, general elections, since Abiy Ahmed came to power in 2018. We're in the company of Ethiopia's ambassador to France, Henok Teferishol. Welcome back as well to Gérard Prunier, author of Understanding Contemporary Ethiopia, Monarchy, Revolution, and the Legacy of Meles Zenawi. From Addis Ababa, from Fort Myers, Florida. There you go. William Davison, a senior analyst at the think tank Crisis Group, and from London, Awal Allo, senior lecturer in international law at Kiel University. We were talking about Abiy when he comes to power in 2018. He is branded a reformer. He frees political prisoners. Among them was Merera Gudina, the leader of the Oromo Federalist Congress. He's expressed disillusion, he says, over the way the campaign and the build-up to this vote has gone.
The government started to close our offices across Oromia. For example, a year back we had 206 offices in Oromia, across Oromia, and including this office. Now we have only got 3. This office, one in Arsi and the other in Ambo. 3 offices, but the rest closed, directly, indirectly.
So, Ambassador, why the shutting down of those electoral offices? And
that is a claim being made by him. If indeed such things have happened, there is a thing called a judiciary, whereby you plead your case, like in this country, and then on that basis, if indeed the closure was done on the basis that was not legal, then they will be reopened, if indeed that has happened. What we know is that, and what we've personally seen is that the National Electoral Board has gone to a great extent to accommodate any and all of the grievances of the opposition parties.
Well, they're letting one opposition leader, Iskandar Nega, run, but he's doing so from jail.
Well, the fact that the courts decided that he can run is a testimony of their independence. You're actually comforting my point. Secondly, whatever cases are pending in front of an Ethiopian court, just like you in France, I would not go into individual cases. That would be undermining the process itself, and it would be wrong. What the government has done is to make sure that there's a system in place of competent, independent judges that look at cases on the basis of their merit. So that is what has been done. And secondly, what I would like also to correct before we go along to other issues is that this assertion that somehow there's a civil war in Tigray. There is no civil war in Tigray. That is a repeated statement that we hear. There is an element or elements of the TPLF that are active in two localities in Tigray. They are completely routed and defeated in all parts of Tigray.
So why is there no vote today there?
Because we are now in the process of rehabilitating them, because there was a conflict imposed on us by the TPLF, which launched attacks against federal military bases in Tigray, which they acknowledged themselves, including on local TV on the 13th of November. And on that basis, we were forced into a situation where we had to dislodge them. And today we are focused and concentrated on providing humanitarian relief, humanitarian assistance. To this day, we have provided 164,000 metric tons of food to over 4.3 million people in Tigray, in many rounds, in 3 rounds actually. That is not reported upon. There will be elections in Tigray in a couple of months once the situation there is completely appeased.
Just last week, the UN was complaining that they still did not have unfettered access to the displaced people in that part.
The Ethiopian government has availed unfettered access to the UN agencies. In fact, there are more than 6 organizations with over 200 staff on the ground. The problem stems in some areas of insecurity. We have said we are willing and ready to give military escort to those humanitarian organizations that want it. That is what we can do as a government, because these are our citizens. We have to help our citizens in Tigray because it's our responsibility and obligation. Actually, it's not even the UN's responsibility. It's our primary obligation towards our citizens, and that is what we're doing.
Gérard Prunier, when Abiy Ahmed came to power, you expressed your surprise at the fact that there was this big turning point. After the Meles years, there was this interregnum, you might say, and then there was this change. Your thoughts on the way it's going now?
Well, anybody can be wrong, and I was wrong at the time. The gentleman has a project for Ethiopia, and his project is to recreate basically a centralized empire. After we had the ethnic federalism period after 1991, I mean, the whole thing is a revolution that is not finished, basically. We're facing the consequences of what happened in 1974 when the empire was overthrown. And it's been half a century. It's not finished. It's still going on now. I'm sorry, I have to disagree with the ambassador, but what is happening in Tigray is obviously a civil war. And actually, it's not working out very well for the government forces, which are now in a process of being hit back. Stronger than they expected, including the Eritrean ally. And by the way, when Merera Gudina was talking about his, voting position in Ambo, it was attacked a few hours ago. There are several people killed. The voting place was attacked by the OLF. Obviously,
which is the separatist movement there.
Yes,
it's not
which
the government,
is an Oromo movement, which is, the mistake...
Which Mr. Owl supports.
The mistake, I think, and I share that mistake, was to believe that because you belong to a certain ethnic group, every members of that ethnic group walk behind you. But yet there are over 30 million Oromos, so, Mr. Abiy does not represent 30 million Oromos. Actually, he was never elected by anybody. He was picked by a very complex process, basically by the Americans, and basically by Ambassador Yamamoto, and basically because of the Pentecostal connection, which is a most fantastic situation, because we're not expecting this, in 21st century politics, but this was the reality. And and I was also carried by a lot of people were enthusiastic because we knew that the revolution wasn't finished, and we knew that it was, we needed some kind of thermidor, to use the French expression. It was not the case. It's still going on. So these hopes were ill-founded.
I have to disagree with Gérard Pougnier very fundamentally. It's a very European-centric view to state that Africans cannot choose their leaders. It has to be chosen from someone abroad. I think we Ethiopians have proven throughout our history that we are not that way. The change within the ruling party came because of the protests, the youth, in particular in Oromia and in Amhara region, but also throughout the country. That change brought a reformist leadership. That reformist leadership had an agenda, which is to liberalize both the country's politics and economy. And that is what it carried out. Despite all the obstacles, despite all the extremes, pulling it from one side and the other, despite all the international undue pressure in some instances. But it is carrying on with the reform process, and the elections mark a turning point in that, as he said, there has never been in Ethiopia a genuinely, truly elected leader in our history. He, if it is him, he will be the one. So that will be a real marking point, whether those extremes like it or not. But it would have been the choice of Ethiopians all the way through.
All right, let's listen to the man himself. Ethiopia's prime minister staging his one and only campaign rally in Jimma. That's the largest city of his home region of Oromia.
We want the whole of Ethiopia to look as green as Jimma does. Therefore, Jimma will plant trees, and Ethiopia will also plant trees. The whole world expects us to be embroiled in conflict on this election day. But we will show them how it really is.
William Davidson, your reaction listening to that speech from a few weeks ago, from last week, excuse me.
I mean, I think the issue is with this election is that, as the ambassador is describing, people from the government perspective, they have their agenda here. They are not concerned about the exclusion of these opposition actors. They see them as illegitimate. They see them as in a struggle against both external pressure and internal enemies. The issue is that really this is exacerbating the political divisions and the polarization that we have in Ethiopia. That's, of course, not to say that there isn't some incremental democratic progress. It could be the independence of the electoral board. There could be progress elsewhere in terms of the participation of some opposition parties getting representation in parliament or the economic modernization agenda. The concerns that we have at Crisis Group is that the exclusion of entire regions, and there is no way that there are lines throughout Ethiopia because there is no voting in at least 3 regions in Ethiopia. But the concern is that those problems there just mean that the political divisions that exist, that have led to people not participating in the election, that are leading to this increasing violence we're seeing in Tigray, Oromia, Benishangul Gumuz region, and elsewhere, that this election, although there may be some benefits to it, especially for the people participating in it, but it will exacerbate those existing divisions. This is why we want to see a process, and everyone who has Ethiopia's interests at heart wants to see some sincere attempt at political reconciliation in Ethiopia. It is no good just to say that there is no civil war in Tigray. We are just in the business of reconstructing it. There's not only no vote in Tigray, there is a conflict going on. The UN humanitarian coordinator says that around 1 million Tigrayans are living in areas where the so-called Tigray Defense Forces are operating. So it's these government narratives that the problems do not exist in Ethiopia, which are part of the problem. We understand the agenda that the government has, but until they start to acknowledge the reality of the country and these very serious divisions, then their action is likely to exacerbate the problems and make the violence and the instability worse.
Well, Alo, there's no silver bullet. So how do you head on the road to reconciliation?
Can I respond to some of the claims that are made by the ambassador sitting there? I have not said anything about the ambassador personally. It's not clear to me why he chose to attack me, calling me an activist, not an academic. Can I just say that the Ethiopian state has been lying coldly about the events in Tigray? They denied that Eritrea entered Ethiopia. They suggested that Eritrea will be withdrawing, and then Eritrea did not withdraw. They accepted that Eritrea was indeed involved in the war. The prime minister told the Ethiopian public that the war is over and no civilian was killed, a logically implausible claim. So there is no surprise that if the ambassador sits there and honestly lies, because his job depends on it. And I think one point I really want to make, because it is important, this ambassador was part of the previous system that he is now willing to condemn as divisive and problematic. Why didn't he do so when he served that system willingly? And I think a lot of the people who are now defending this system as somewhat different and offers a radical alternative to the future are the same people who were very much active in that system, including the prime minister. I think in terms of the key point that you raised about how can the country tackles the central question of reconciliation, building national consensus, and putting the nation on a path to a proper transition. And I think what a significant number of people within Ethiopia and outside Ethiopia were asking the government is to give reconciliation a chance, to go the path of dialogue instead of embarking on an electoral process that forecloses the possibility of a peaceful and democratic resolution to the structural problem that Ethiopia is facing. So if the government accepted an all-inclusive national dialogue, then that national dialogue process could have agreed Ethiopia's future, and that agreement could be secured by way of a constitution, and conditions for a free, fair, democratic elections could be established. The reason why the prime minister desperately wanted this election is because there is this cloud of illegitimacy that has been hanging over his head. He's the prime minister that inherited a very problematic mandate. He himself denounced that mandate, basically saying that we stayed on power through quote-unquote terrorist methods. That very mandate expired in October 2020. So he has this serious problem in terms of...
Okay, but now the election's happening.
Sorry?
I said, but now the election is happening.
Exactly. So the problem now is the elections have happened. And I think what the government is planning to do is to tell the international community, in exactly the same way this ambassador is doing, that these elections are better than the previous election. Parliament would have some opposition, and this opposition, who are aligned ideologically with the government, would be allowed to engage in some debate. So they would say, this parliament is better than the previous parliament, and therefore the international community must give a chance to this government. And I think most likely they will impose a new constitutional settlement on the country that excludes the various stakeholders that are included from this election. I think going down that path would hasten the breakup of the Ethiopian state, and the best way, I think, for the opposition, for the government, all the stakeholders in this country, is to give a chance in dialogue process that will agree Ethiopia's future. And that future should not be left to the decision of the ruling party and these ideologically aligned entities, but the Ethiopian people must have a say in what kind of country, what kind of society we will have going forward.
Ambassador Tefera, once the election period is passed, once the vote takes place, would you agree to the concept of having a national dialogue, of having a...
What we have to agree, first and foremost, is that nobody can come to power without an election. What Mr. Awal is suggesting is somehow to a bargaining arrangement among elites that people can somehow have a shortcut to power. That is not possible anymore in Ethiopia. What we're saying is that people have to choose through the ballot box, period. And to be chosen through the ballot box, you have to play by a rule of the game.
But that's not what I'm
saying. Very clear.
You are misstating
the idea that we want to delegitimize this election, the idea that behind it is the idea of creating a transitional government, which is their dream. And that is a fantasy. It will never happen. The people will choose whichever government comes out of the ballot box will rule the country. And of course, the political process has to be consolidated.
But the fear expressed by Awal Alo is that we're moving away from the federal system that we have now.
The government, and at least the ruling party, the one that is in power today, has a very clear platform. It says that it is for the multinational federation. It is for the multinational federation. But the multinational federation has to be balanced. it has been skewed, it has lost its balance in the sense that it was used to oppose communities against one another. And we've seen it, and we see it. So we have to create a sense of brotherhood and community among Ethiopians, because the political actors have sought to make it divisive and oppose, and so that people kill each other. Unfortunately, the Ethiopian people were wise, and wiser than the activists such as Mr. Awal. They said no to your agenda. We want to remain united. We want to work within one country. That doesn't mean that we abandon who we are. I and many Ethiopians, by the way, can be Amara and Oromo and Tigrayan. We are a mixed blood. We have lived together as a people for centuries. So this idea of having segregated lines among people, communities as if they were living side by side. No, communities in Ethiopia have lived together. They have not lived side by side. Maybe in London, where Mr. Awal is, that's his vision, but that's not the case.
Awal, we're running short on time, but just your vision of what it means to preserve a federal Ethiopia.
Well, a federal Ethiopia is basically a system in which the various nations, nationalities who live in Ethiopia, who fought for their autonomy for the last 1 century, would be allowed to have their own region at the local level. They can govern themselves, they can develop their language, they can develop their culture, but at the center, they can govern the Ethiopian state with the rest of the people. The point about multinational federalism has never been about opposing other groups. It has been about addressing past historical injustices of the Ethiopian state, where the vast majority of people who live in that country were marginalized and excluded from political life. The Prime Minister has said over and over again that identity politics in Ethiopia is a problem. If you are really not committed to identity problem as a principle that is crucial in terms of organizing, structuring the federal system in Ethiopia, then you are not committed to multinational federalism. So what the ambassador is suggesting, actually really interesting, it says that this is not multinational federalism. You could have probably a different kind of federalism, but the kind of federalism that works in Ethiopia is one that speaks directly to the central political question that existed in that country for the last 50 years. And I think that is multinational federalism. And what is being offered
if I can answer one quickly. Politics, first and foremost, should be about ideas in any mature democracy. It should not be about identities. People stuck on identities should at least try to elevate themselves. That doesn't mean that we abandon our culture, our language. That doesn't mean that you can have differences and diversity. So this idea somehow of saying, because we advocate unity among the Ethiopian people, somehow we are against the federal system is false. It's a false narrative.
One final question. I'll put it to you, Gérard Prunier, and that is, well, the language is hard. And previous debates that we did specifically on Tigray, it was even harder. What is it about Ethiopian on the hashtag F24debates? There's quite a bit of vitriol. Why is it so hard, this language?
Because this is a multinational empire where people are trying to live together and they have not found the recipe. Basically, some things are absolutely amazing. Some of the closest ally of the present government are people who tried to overthrow it in 2019. They had a coup during which they killed the chief of staff of the army. And now they're the best allies of the government. It's just playing games with a variety of ethnic identities. You can say they don't exist, or you can say this one is more strong than the others. But the fact that some kind of a magic recipe exists, you say there is no silver bullet, it's unfortunately very true. This is why the decision of attacking Tigray on November 4th last year was a catastrophe. Because, anything but.
It was not an attack, it was self-defense.
No. It was not self-defense. No. And I'm not even sure that the attack against the Northern Command ever existed at all.
But they said it themselves.
Oh, yes, of course. If the government says it, then it's true.
No, the TPLF leadership said it themselves.
Okay,
Mr. Sekou Touré Getachew went on local Tigrayan TV to say it
and,
on 13 November.
Good.
And then I think
and so
another leader confirmed it.
It was unfortunate,
Why is that
but it
difficult
had
to
to be
accept?
done. Okay? So the result now is we have not one civil war, we have 3 or 4. Because the Oromos who just attacked the Ambo voting sites are not Tigrayans. What is happening in Bani Shangul is not either the Tigrayans.
But it's not the same proportion. With all due respect, when the TPLF, armed with 250,000 fighters, as they claimed, attack and seize 80% of the heavy military equipment of the Ethiopian army, we're not at the same level.
All right.
So
We'll have to seize what they already had.
Disagreement on that, but I want to thank all of you for an informative conversation. I want to thank Ambassador Henok Tefera Shaw, Gérard Prunier, William Davison in Fort Myers, Florida, and Awal Allo in London. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.